The small-town diner sat at the corner of Main Street, a humble place that had seen better days. Its faded red and white sign hung crookedly above the door, and the windows, though still clean, had begun to show signs of age. Inside, the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee filled the air, a familiar comfort to those who stopped by. It was a place where people gathered not just for food but for connection. The owner of the diner, a man in his late 40s, had been running the business for almost 2 decades. He had inherited the diner from his parents, who had started it with nothing more than a dream and a handful of loyal customers. Over the years, it had become a staple of the community. People came from all over the town to grab a bite, share a laugh, and pass the time. The diner was more than just a place to eat. It was a small piece of home. But now it was on the verge of closing. The financial strain had grown too much to bear. Bills piled up, suppliers were asking for payment, and the number of customers had dwindled over the past few years. With each passing month, the owner found himself sinking deeper into debt. He had tried everything to turn things around, changing the menu, offering discounts, even hosting karaoke nights to draw in the crowd, but nothing seemed to work. It felt like the end was near, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on. One chilly evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the town, the diner owner sat behind the counter, his head resting in his hands. The thought of losing the diner, his family's legacy, his only means of livelihood, was weighing heavily on him. The once bustling kitchen now felt eerily quiet, and the empty tables in the dining room were a reminder of just how bad things had gotten. He stared out the window, watching the few cars drive by. The diner had always been a place of warmth and energy, filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter. But now it felt like a shell of its former self. The owner sighed, wondering if he'd ever get the chance to turn things around, or if the diner would soon become another forgotten memory in a town that had long since moved on. As he sat lost in thought, the doorbell above the diner's entrance jingled. The owner looked up, surprised to see a man and a young girl standing in the doorway. They both looked out of place, their worn clothing and tired expressions telling a story of hardship. The man, probably in his early 30s, had a scruffy beard and eyes that seemed to carry a heavy burden. The girl, no older than 10, clung to his side, her small hand wrapped around his fingers. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide, scanning the diner as if it was the first time she'd seen a place like it. The man hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The cold air followed them in, and the diner owner could feel the weight of their presence. The girl's footsteps were light as she walked with her father, her shoes worn thin from what was clearly a long journey. The father looked over at the owner and gave a small, awkward smile. "Is it all right if we sit down for a while?" the man asked, his voice soft but tinged with uncertainty. The diner owner paused, then nodded. "Of course. Take a seat wherever you like," he replied, trying to mask the exhaustion in his voice. He motioned toward a booth by the window and they made their way over. The father helped the girl into the seat, then slid in across from her. There was an uncomfortable silence as the man looked down at the menu, clearly unsure of what to order. The owner walked over slowly, his feet dragging as he tried to shake off the melancholy that had settled in his chest. "What can I get you?" he asked, forcing a smile. The man glanced up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "Just some coffee for me, and do you have anything for her?" He nodded toward the girl, who was staring out the window, her hands folded in her lap. The diner owner's heart went out to them. The girl looked so small, so fragile, and the father's face seemed to hold a world of pain. There was something about them that made him pause, made him think about the struggles he had been facing himself. He knew what it was like to feel like you were at the end of your rope, to feel as though there was no way out. And yet here they were, asking for nothing more than a warm meal and a place to rest. "I'll make something special for her," he said, his voice a little softer now. "You just relax. We don't have much, but we'll make do." The man gave a faint nod of thanks, his shoulders relaxing slightly. The owner went to the kitchen, where the faint smell of fresh coffee mingled with the sizzle of eggs and bacon. As he prepared the food, he couldn't help but think about how different his life had been only a few years ago. Back then, the diner was bustling, and he was surrounded by friends and regular customers. Now it was just him, a few scattered memories and a fading dream. When he returned with their meal, the girl looked up at him with wide eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The owner smiled, unsure of what to say. He set the food down in front of them, and as he did, he felt a strange warmth spread through him. It wasn't just the act of kindness. It was something more. He was doing something for someone else when, just moments ago, it felt like everything was falling apart. It was a small thing, yes, but it felt significant. It felt right. As the father and daughter ate, the owner lingered nearby, cleaning tables and wiping down counters. He couldn't help but glance over at them from time to time, wondering about their story. What had brought them to this point? How had they ended up here in a small-town diner with no place to call home? After a while, the man looked up at him again, this time with a hint of concern in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to impose," he said, his voice shaky. "But, do you happen to have any place for us to stay tonight? We don't have anywhere else to go." The question hung in the air, and for a moment the diner owner was silent. He didn't have much to offer, but the idea of sending them out into the cold with nowhere to turn seemed wrong. He looked down at his hands, then back at the man and his daughter. They were vulnerable, in need of something he could give. "I don't have much," he said, his voice low but firm. "But you're welcome to stay here tonight if you need to. It's not much, but it's warm." The father's face softened, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. The diner owner nodded, then stepped back to let them settle in. He knew that his decision might not be the best for his already struggling business, but something inside him told him it was the right thing to do. After all, sometimes helping others, no matter how little you had, was what truly made a difference, and so, in the dim light of the diner, the father and daughter settled in for the night, with no idea of the unexpected turn their lives were about to take. The night passed slowly in the diner. The warmth from the stove and the aroma of fresh food lingered in the air, offering a sense of comfort that had been missing for a long time. The father and daughter settled into their small corner in the back of the diner. It was nothing much, just a few cots, blankets, and a small table, but it was enough for the night. The diner owner did what he could to make them comfortable, giving them extra pillows and an old lamp to provide some light in the dim room. He didn't ask many questions. He could see the tiredness in their eyes and felt the weight of their unspoken story. As he locked up for the night, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought them to this point, what they had been through to end up here, at the diner where he too felt his own struggles weighing him down. The father didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were often about his daughter. He always made sure she was okay, that she had enough to eat, that she felt safe. The daughter, on the other hand, was quiet. She didn't ask for anything, just sat close to her father, occasionally looking up at the diner owner with curious eyes. She seemed too young to be carrying such a heavy load, too innocent to be caught up in a life that seemed so hard. As the night went on, the diner owner found himself staying up later than usual. He couldn't bring himself to go to bed. His mind was busy, turning over all sorts of things. His diner, once a bustling business that everyone in town relied on, now felt like a burden he couldn't shake. The thought of bankruptcy kept him up, but it wasn't just the money that troubled him. It was the feeling of helplessness. It was the fear of losing everything he had worked for, but there was something about the father and daughter, about their quiet gratitude, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could keep going. Maybe the diner wasn't just a place to serve food. Maybe it could still be a place for something more. The next morning, the father and daughter were awake early. The diner wasn't open yet, but the father had already gathered his things, preparing to leave. The daughter was still holding on to her stuffed animal, her small hand wrapped tightly around it. "Thank you," the man said quietly as he approached the diner owner, his voice soft but sincere. "You didn't have to do this for us, but we're grateful. We don't know what we would have done." The diner owner gave a simple nod, not sure what to say in response. He didn't expect any thanks. The decision to help them had felt right, but it was still hard to explain. He could see how much the father cared for his daughter, how he would do anything to make sure she had a better life, even if it meant carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Don't mention it," the diner owner replied with a small smile. "I'm just glad you have a place to rest." The father nodded but still seemed uneasy. "I've been looking for work," he said, his words heavy with frustration. "But it's been hard. People don't want to hire someone like me, not with everything that's happened." The diner owner understood. He had heard the stories of good people who fell on hard times, who were suddenly left with nothing. He'd seen people lose jobs, homes, and dignity, all in the blink of an eye. It wasn't fair, but it was the way the world worked sometimes. And though he wished he could offer more, he didn't have much to give. "You'll find something," the diner owner said, offering what little encouragement he could. "Sometimes things get rough, but they don't stay that way forever." The father nodded again, though there was a lingering sadness in his eyes. He glanced over at his daughter, who was now quietly sipping from a cup of juice. The little girl's gaze was fixed on the diner's window as though she were lost in thought. "We'll get by," the father said, standing up slowly, one way or another. The diner owner watched them gather their things and head toward the door. He wanted to help more, to offer them something that could change their lives, but he didn't know how. He had his own struggles, his own problems to deal with. But something about their quiet dignity, their refusal to give up, left a mark on him. They weren't asking for much, just a little kindness, a little hope in a world that seemed to offer so little. Later that day, after the diner opened, the owner couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a difference, even if it was just for one night. He went through his usual routine, serving customers and preparing meals, but his mind kept drifting back to the father and daughter. They had left with nothing more than a warm meal and a place to sleep for the night, but he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, that had been enough to change something for them. As the hours passed, the owner began to feel the weight of his own struggles again. The bills were still piling up and there was no sign of things improving. The diner was barely making enough to cover the costs and he was running out of options. He thought about the father's words, about how hard it was to find work, how people like him were often overlooked, left behind. The owner had been there before. He knew what it felt like to fight for something, to struggle for survival, and yet still find himself falling short. The thought made him restless. He began to wonder what else he could do to turn things around. He had already cut costs, lowered prices, and tried to bring in more customers. But none of it was enough. The diner had been losing money for months and he was starting to run out of ideas. In the middle of his thoughts, the door jingled again. The owner looked up and saw the father and daughter walking back into the diner. They looked a little different than before, less tired, less burdened. The father gave him a small smile as he approached the counter. "Hi there," the father said, his voice a bit lighter than before. "I know we said we were going to leave, but we've been thinking." The diner owner raised an eyebrow, curious. "We wanted to thank you again, but also, we were wondering if there's anything we could do to help you," the father continued. "I mean, we've both been looking for work and maybe we could pitch in here. We could help with cleaning or anything, really. You've done so much for us and, we want to give back." The diner owner was taken aback. He hadn't expected this. He had barely enough money to keep the diner running, let alone hire extra help. But there was something about the sincerity in the father's voice that made him pause. They didn't have much, but they were willing to help, to work for their keep. "I appreciate that," the diner owner said slowly, his mind spinning. "But honestly, I don't know if I can pay you anything. Things are a little tight right now." The father nodded, not seeming disappointed. "We understand. We don't need much. Just a chance to help, to do something." The diner owner thought for a moment. He had never been one to ask for help, but the idea of working together, of sharing the load, felt right. Maybe it wasn't the answer to all his problems, but it was a start, a small spark of hope in an otherwise dark situation. "All right," the diner owner said with a smile. "I could use an extra hand around here. Why don't you both stay and help for a bit? Maybe we can figure something out." And just like that, a new chapter began. The father and daughter stayed, pitching in wherever they could, and though things weren't perfect, there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. It was small, but it was enough to remind them all that even in the hardest of times, sometimes, just a little bit of kindness and hard work could make all the difference. The diner, once on the brink of closing, found itself becoming more than just a place to eat. It was becoming a place where people could come together, where struggles were shared and where hope, though small, was still alive. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life at the diner began to shift. The father and daughter had settled into a rhythm. The daughter, who had been so quiet and withdrawn at first, began to smile more often. She helped the diner owner with small tasks like wiping down tables or arranging the sugar packets, her small hands moving quickly as she learned. The father, too, became more comfortable. He started to share more about his past, about his dreams and struggles. Though he was still hesitant, there was a spark of hope in his eyes that hadn't been there when he first arrived. The diner owner, too, noticed the change. Something about having the father and daughter there, working side by side with him, made the days a little easier to bear. The diner still wasn't doing great. Money was tight and customers were few. But there was a sense of purpose now, a feeling that maybe they could make it through together. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about people, about community, about finding ways to keep going, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow through the diner's windows, the father approached the diner owner. He had that familiar look in his eyes, the one that said he had something important to say. The daughter, sitting at the counter, was quietly coloring in a book. Her father had been teaching her to draw, and it was clear that she enjoyed it. The father sat down across from the diner owner, his hands nervously fiddling with the edge of his sleeve. "Is something wrong?" the diner owner asked, his voice gentle. He had gotten used to the father's quiet manner, but it was clear that something was on his mind. The father hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot," he said slowly. "I want to do more. For her, for both of us. I don't want to keep depending on you forever. I know you've already done so much for us, but I feel like I need to stand on my own 2 feet again." The diner owner understood. He could see the father's desire to regain his independence, to provide for his daughter in the way he had once hoped. It was a feeling the diner owner knew well. He had spent years building the diner, trying to make it work, but the thought of losing it all weighed heavily on him. "I get it," the diner owner replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's tough, but you've got to know there's no shame in asking for help. Sometimes the hardest part is just letting people in, letting them help when you need it." The father nodded, but there was still a sense of determination in his eyes. I don't know how to start over. I don't even know where to begin." The diner owner thought for a moment, his gaze drifting over to the small diner kitchen. The place wasn't much, but it had always been enough. He had worked there for years, preparing meals for his customers, always putting in his best effort even when things were hard. Maybe that's where the answer was. Maybe they could work together, use what they had to build something new. "Well, you know the diner business," the diner owner said, his voice thoughtful. "Maybe you could help me in the kitchen. We could start with something small. Maybe a special dish, something that brings in new customers. It wouldn't be much, but it's a start." The father's eyes lit up. "I used to cook," he said, the words coming faster now as if a weight had been lifted. "Back before everything fell apart, I had my own place. I ran a small restaurant just like this one. But when it went under, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do." The diner owner listened carefully, sensing the pain in the father's voice. "So you know your way around a kitchen, huh?" he said with a small smile. "Well, that's a good start. Maybe we can work together on something, you and me." The father nodded, a spark of hope shining through. "I can help. I'll do whatever I can. I don't need much, just a chance." The diner owner thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's give it a shot," and so they began. The father started working with the diner owner in the kitchen, preparing meals together. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like they weren't making much progress. But each day they improved a little bit more. They experimented with new recipes, talked about old times, and slowly started building something new. The daughter, too, became more involved. She helped where she could, fetching ingredients or serving drinks to customers. At first, the customers didn't notice much of a difference. The diner was still the same, small, cozy, and unassuming. But slowly, word began to spread. People started to talk about the new dishes, about the warmth that seemed to fill the diner, not just from the food, but from the people inside. The diner owner noticed a slight increase in business, just enough to keep the doors open. It wasn't much, but it was something. One evening, as the diner was about to close, a couple walked in. They had been regulars at the diner for years, always sitting in the same booth by the window. They had watched the diner owner's struggles, seen the quiet decline of the place over the past few months. The man, a local farmer, looked at the diner owner with a knowing expression. "You've got something different going on here," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I don't know what it is, but there's a feeling in the air. You've got some kind of magic going on back there in that kitchen." The diner owner was taken aback. "You think so?" he asked, his voice tentative. The woman, who had always been more outgoing, smiled. "We're not the only ones who've noticed," she said. "There's something about the food now. It's better, tastes fresher. Like you've got a new fire under you. Whatever it is, you've got something good here. The diner owner felt a swell of pride in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he had been craving that kind of recognition. It wasn't about the money or the fame, it was about knowing that what they were doing mattered. That they were doing something good, something real. Over the next few weeks, the diner continued to improve. The father and daughter's presence brought a new energy to the place, and the food, though simple, was now something customers could count on. The diner owner began to feel like he wasn't just running a business anymore. He was building something that had meaning. As the diner started to pick up, more people came through the doors. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough. Enough to keep the lights on. Enough to give them hope. The diner owner found himself smiling more often, the weight on his shoulders growing lighter. And though they still had a long way to go, the small victories were enough to keep pushing forward. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. The father and daughter were no longer strangers. They were part of the diner, part of the family. The diner owner knew that they all had a long road ahead of them, but they would face it together. With hard work, hope, and the kind of community spirit that could only be found in places like this, maybe, just maybe, they could turn things around. The diner's small yet steady improvement gave everyone a sense of relief. The father, though still working hard alongside the diner owner, felt a new sense of purpose. Each day was a small victory, and for the first time in a long time, he was beginning to believe that things could get better. He hadn't given up on himself, but now, with the diner becoming a small but reliable source of comfort for the community, he had something tangible to fight for: his daughter's future. The daughter had begun to brighten up as well. Her quiet nature, once her shield against a world full of uncertainty, slowly melted away as she felt safer. She no longer held onto her stuffed animal as tightly or avoided eye contact with others. Instead, she now helped where she could, sharing her wide-eyed curiosity with anyone who walked into the diner. Even though she was still young, the little girl brought a lightness to the place, something the diner hadn't had in a long time. Her innocent joy, combined with the father's quiet determination and the diner owner's steady presence, created an atmosphere that was hard to ignore. One evening, as the sun set, casting its golden light through the diner windows, a man in a suit walked through the door. He looked out of place in the small, cozy diner with his crisp suit and polished shoes. His eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly at the father and daughter before landing on the diner owner, who was wiping down the counter. The man made his way to the counter, and the diner owner looked up, offering a polite but tired smile. It had been a long day, and the diner was quiet as it usually was during the early evening hours. "Can I help you?" the diner owner asked, his voice hoarse from a day of talking to customers and stirring pots in the kitchen. The man glanced around, taking in the old-fashioned booths, the vintage photographs hanging on the walls, and the smell of fresh coffee. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "I heard this was the place to go for something different." The diner owner's brow furrowed. "Different?" he repeated, unsure what the man meant. The man smiled slightly, almost knowingly. "I'm here about your diner," he said, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "I'm a part of an investment group, and we've been keeping an eye on places like this. Your diner has potential. You've got something special here, but I think it could be more. Much more." The diner owner stiffened, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "I don't really know what you mean," he said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "We're just doing what we can to keep things running." The man didn't seem put off. He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering even further. "I know it's tough," he said, "but I'm offering an opportunity. You could turn this place into something big. We're willing to invest in your diner, to give you the resources to really make it thrive. But you'd have to make some changes. A fresh start, new management, maybe some renovations." The diner owner's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced. An opportunity? He had spent so much time trying to keep things afloat, trying to find a way out of the hole he was in. But this man's offer sounded like more than just an offer. It felt like a lifeline. Yet something in him hesitated. "I don't know," the diner owner began. "I've been here a long time. This diner means a lot to me. It's more than just a business. It's my family's legacy." The man nodded as if understanding. "I get it," he said. "But you have to think about the future. It's not just about holding on to what you have. It's about growing, adapting. There's more out there if you're willing to take it." The diner owner hesitated. He had always prided himself on maintaining the diner's family atmosphere, on staying true to what it had been for so many years. But the thought of change, of finally breaking free from the financial struggles that had weighed on him for so long, was tempting. "I'm not saying you should make any decisions right now," the man continued. "But think about it. We'll be around. When you're ready, just let me know." With that, the man stood up, dropped a business card on the counter, and left without another word. The diner owner stared at the card for a long time, his fingers trembling slightly as he picked it up. His thoughts were a blur. What did he really want? The offer was tempting, but it felt wrong in some way. Something about it didn't sit right with him. The rest of the night was quiet. The father and daughter, who had been cleaning up after dinner, noticed the diner owner's distracted look, but didn't say anything. They could sense his mood shift, but they knew better than to press him. The diner owner was a private man, someone who kept his struggles to himself. As the night wore on, the diner owner couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with the stranger. He turned the business card over and over in his hands, his mind swirling with possibilities. On one hand, the offer was an opportunity to turn things around, to take the diner to the next level. But on the other hand, it felt like giving up on what he had built, on what his family had worked so hard for. It felt like selling out. He couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the card resting on his nightstand. His thoughts circled back to the father and daughter. They had worked so hard to build something together, and he had begun to think of them as part of the diner's family. He didn't want to make any decision that might take that away. The next day, the father and daughter came in early, as they usually did. The father was already at the counter, wiping it down, while the daughter was sitting at a table, coloring in her book. They both noticed the diner owner's tense expression, and the father, who had always been attuned to the owner's moods, spoke first. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. The diner owner looked up, surprised by the question. He nodded, but didn't say much. "Just a lot on my mind," he said, trying to brush it off. The father didn't press him, but the concern on his face was clear. He had come to respect the diner owner, to see him as someone who had become more than just a boss. He had become a friend. The father wanted to help, but he wasn't sure how. The day went on, and customers came in, greeted by the familiar smells of coffee and fresh food. The diner had a certain warmth to it, a kind of quiet charm that couldn't be easily replicated. The father and daughter worked alongside the diner owner, making small improvements here and there, doing what they could to keep things going. But by the end of the day, the diner owner knew what he had to do. The offer from the stranger had weighed heavily on his heart, but he couldn't let it define him. He had spent so many years working in this place, building it from the ground up. He wasn't ready to give up on it yet, not without a fight. The next morning, after some time to think, the diner owner picked up the phone. He dialed the number. On the business card, his hand steady despite the doubt still lingering in his mind. When the man picked up, the diner owner spoke firmly. "Thank you for the offer," he said. "But I think I'm going to keep things the way they are. I don't want to change what this place is about." The man on the other end of the line was silent for a moment before he spoke. "I understand," he said, though his tone was tinged with disappointment. "It's your choice, but if you ever change your mind—" "I won't," the diner owner replied, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. And just like that, the decision was made. He was going to fight for the diner, not for the money, not for the fame, but for the community, for the father and daughter who had become a part of it. The journey wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Weeks passed, and though the diner's future still hung in the balance, the owner had found a new determination. He didn't know where the road would lead, but he knew he couldn't give up on what he had built. He had chosen the harder path, the one that felt true to his heart. The stranger's offer had been tempting, but it wasn't the kind of help he wanted. The diner meant more than just survival. It was a part of him, a part of the community he had built, and he wasn't about to let go of it so easily. The father and daughter, too, seemed to sense the shift. The little girl had started to help more around the diner, taking on small tasks with a seriousness beyond her years. She now helped deliver orders to the tables, filled glasses with water, and even wiped down the counters after the rush. Her presence had become more vital to the place, and it seemed like the whole diner was thriving because of it. The father, always more reserved, had started to take a more active role in the kitchen. Together, he and the diner owner experimented with new recipes, trying to add a little more flavor, a little more creativity to the menu. It wasn't easy. They didn't have fancy equipment or a big budget to work with, but what they did have was a love for what they were doing, and a sense of camaraderie that couldn't be matched. The regulars began to notice the changes. The food was fresher, the atmosphere warmer. There was a renewed energy in the air, a sense that this was no longer just a place to eat, it was a place to be. The customers began to feel like family, just as they had in the past. The diner owner, who had once feared that it was too late to make a difference, now saw that the diner wasn't just surviving, it was starting to thrive in its own way. One afternoon, as the dinner rush came to an end, a familiar face walked through the door. The diner owner looked up from the counter and saw the man in the suit, the one who had made the offer a few weeks earlier. This time the man wasn't alone. He was accompanied by another individual, someone who looked just as polished and professional as he did. The diner owner's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected the man to return. The man approached the counter with a polite smile. "I hope you don't mind us coming back," he said. "I just wanted to see how things were going." The diner owner gave a tight smile. "Things are going well," he said. "What brings you back?" "I wanted to check in," the man replied. "I understand that you decided to turn down our offer, and I respect that. But I also wanted to see if there was any way we could still work together. We've been watching how things have been going here, and I think there's a real opportunity for growth. If you change your mind, we're still interested." The diner owner felt a flash of irritation but quickly suppressed it. He knew this wasn't the time for confrontation. Instead, he kept his voice calm. "I appreciate the offer, but I've made my decision. I'm not interested in selling or changing anything right now. This diner means too much to me." The man nodded, though it was clear that he wasn't pleased. "I understand," he said, his voice almost cold. "But I think you're making a mistake. There's a lot of money to be made here, and we could help you grow your business in ways you can't even imagine." The diner owner was about to respond when the father, who had been working in the kitchen, walked out to the counter. He had heard the conversation and stepped forward, his posture straight and his expression firm. "We're not interested in turning this place into a chain," he said, his voice calm but confident. "We're building something here that matters, something real. We're not looking for shortcuts." The man in the suit raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the father's sudden appearance. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone almost dismissive. "I'm the one who works in the kitchen helping make this place what it is," the father replied, his voice unwavering. "I may not have a fancy suit or a business card, but I know what this diner means to this community. We're not interested in turning it into something else." There was a tense silence, but the diner owner could see that the man's resolve was weakening. He had expected resistance, but not this kind of resolve from the father. It was clear that they had come a long way together, that the diner had become more than just a business. It had become a part of their lives. After a moment, the man in the suit sighed. "I see. Well, if you change your mind, we'll be here. But I think you're making a mistake." Without waiting for a response, the man turned and walked out, his companion following closely behind. The diner owner stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. He knew that the offer had been tempting, but he also knew that it wasn't the right path for them. The diner was more than just a business, it was a home. It was a place where people came together, shared stories, and found comfort in each other. It wasn't something that could be bought or sold. The father turned to the diner owner, his expression unreadable. "You did the right thing," he said simply. The diner owner nodded. "I hope so. I don't want to lose what we've built here." The little girl, who had been quietly watching from the side, ran up to them with a bright smile on her face. "Are we going to make our special pancakes today?" she asked eagerly. The diner owner chuckled, his heart lightening. Of course we are, he said, ruffling her hair. We'll make the biggest pancakes ever. As the day wound down and the diner began to empty out, the owner felt a deep sense of contentment. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't worried about what the future held. He had the support of his friends, the father and daughter who had become his family, and the community that continued to believe in him. The next morning, the father and daughter came in early as they always did. The father had a quiet confidence about him now, and the little girl was even more eager to help. They worked together, preparing for another day of business, but this time it felt different. There was a sense of unity, of purpose that hadn't been there before. The diner had become a place where people didn't just come to eat, they came to be a part of something. As the hours passed, more customers came through the door. There was a sense of excitement in the air, a buzz that hadn't been there before. People came in, not just for the food, but for the atmosphere, for the feeling of warmth and community that seemed to radiate from the walls. The diner owner stood behind the counter, watching it all unfold. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. This was where he belonged. This was his home. And as long as he had the father and daughter by his side, as long as the community continued to support them, he knew they could make it. Together, they could build something that was worth more than any offer from a stranger. They could build something real,